I think we can get started this morning then. So my name's Tom Phillis, and I work in the European Commission's Directorate General for Informatics in the CEF Stakeholder Management Office. Basically, our office deals with the promotion of the Connecting Europe Facility financed building blocks, and I'll go into that a bit more. But first, we will quickly have a look at the ground rules for this webinar. So as I've said, please click on Connect Audio to hear, but mute your microphone, and we will mute you as we're going along, and this is to stop excessive background noise. You can submit your questions in the chat function. You can submit that to the account Kelly Lilyemo, or you can submit it in the open group chat, because we will endeavour to address all questions. We will endeavour to answer all questions throughout the webinar, and we will also publish written answers to all the questions subsequently. And if we aren't able in the time available to get through all of the questions, then you can check the written ones that we published. But I see that we will have around 20 minutes for Q&A, so it should be fine. Finally, please note that this webinar is being recorded, and we will publish the recording of this webinar on what is now the registration page, which we will update subsequently with all the presentations and the recording. Questions can be asked via the chat, as I've said, but we use the hashtag Connecting Europe if you're keen to promote the messages that we're discussing today via social media. Okay, so without any further ado, we can get started. So here we have today's agenda. So I said I'm Tom, and I'm just going to very briefly give an overview of the program that we're discussing. Today, the CEF program, and specifically the CEF building blocks, of which eArchiving is one. We then have Jamie Kaminski, who is going to go through the trainings that are currently being offered around the eArchiving building block. And then we have the introduction to the CSIP by Karin Bredenberg. And then, as I said, we have approximately 20 minutes for Q&A. So assuming everything seems quite clear at the get-go, so basically a quick overview for those of you who are joining and may not be familiar with the CEF program or the CEF building blocks more comprehensively. So the Connecting Europe Facility, or CEF, is a financing program. It's the EU's largest financing instrument for cross-border connectivity. It's actually a infrastructure program. So it finances infrastructure in the areas of transport, energy, and telecom. And within telecom, the largest amount is earmarked for the Connecting Europe Facility building blocks, which I'll explain in a moment. Just to explain a little bit how it's governed, there is a regulation which sort of creates the CEF and defines the areas of support that the European Union can engage in. For CEF Telecom, there are then the CEF Telecom guidelines, and these cover the general and strategic objectives of the program. These are principles such as supporting mature IT solutions and solutions that are designed or able to be used in a cross-border context, etc. And then finally, we have our annual work programs, which are published on the Commission's website, which define the work which will go on in a specific year. And this is how the program is structured. The CEF program runs 2014 to 2020, so we're now at the end of the current program, and discussions are now underway as we move forward to the Digital Europe program, which is the EU's largest ever financing program for digital connectivity. So I've mentioned the CEF building blocks. These are reusable modular solutions which are designed to enable key attributes in digital services. What does that mean? It's about, for example, EID allows citizens to connect to public services using their national electronic ID in another member state. So a Belgian person living in Germany can register at their local town hall or register to a course at university, etc. The e-delivery building block, for example, supports secure cross-border data exchange. So it does this by promoting the AS4 standard message exchange protocol. The building blocks themselves basically promote standards. So at the core of any one building block, you have a constituent standard or range of standards and specifications. These are often defined in EU legislation, and the building blocks basically support the implementation of these standards by providing, first of all, the standards and then offering a range of supporting services. And I'll outline that in a moment. Of the collection of building blocks that you see here, the eID, e-delivery, and e-signature building blocks all support the implementation on the eIDAS regulation. That's the regulation on authentication and trust services in the internal market. E-invoicing supports the implementation of the European standard on e-invoicing, as mandated through the directive on e-invoicing and public procurement. The context broker, big data test infrastructure, and e-archiving are all seen as basically components of the data value chain. So how do you use data sets? How do you deploy them in services and smart services? And finally, how do you engage in long-term data storage? And finally, we have e-translation, which offers a multilingual, the ability to have multilingual cross-border public services by basically using an API. So we're going to focus today specifically on e-archiving and some specific components of e-archiving, but we just wanted to explain a little bit what the program is, what the CEF program is, and note that e-archiving is one building block among several. And if you're interested in any of the other building blocks, then we can provide information on those. And on the CEF digital website, which is home to all the information on CEF e-archiving, you will also find all the information you need on the other CEF building blocks. So what does a building block contain? So you have the sample, you can have sample software containing the standards. You then can have access to training sessions, and we'll be discussing some of those in the e-archiving context today. And conformance testing services, basically to ensure that the standards contained within the building block have been correctly applied, and these services are free. And how do you use a building block? Well, you can either take the core constituent standards and build a software solution. You can buy compliant solutions from the market, or you can reuse sample software provided by the Commission. And this all changes slightly depending on which building block is under discussion, but this is the broad way in which you implement one. So there are just a few opening words on the program. I think we'll take all the questions at the end. I think that probably is easier, and I'll be happy to answer any questions on the wider catalogue of building blocks. I'll hand over now to Jamie. So how we're going to do it today is that I will move us through the slides. So Jamie will just tell me when he wants to move to the next slide. And the reason we're doing it like this, it's obviously not very seamless, but this allows us to record the webinar. And if we change presenters, then we lose the ability to record the webinar. So Jamie, please.
Thank you, Tom, for that really useful introduction to the building blocks. Next slide, please. Thank you. So today it is my pleasure to welcome you to the very first training webinar produced by the eArchiving building block. But before we actually look at content of today's webinar, I just wanted to say a few words about the eArchiving building block itself. Because I'm sure there's a few of you out there who are thinking, what exactly does the eArchiving building block actually do? Next slide, please. So the eArchiving building block was created in late 2018, and it provides a set of specifications and tools for transmitting, describing and preserving digital data, all of which can be found on the Building Block website, which you saw on the previous slide. In terms of the variety of services that we provide, we maintain technical specifications like the common specification for information packages that we're going to be looking at today. We provide open source tools that you can download and use right away. We have compliance and validation services that ensure that specifications are followed. We have a service desk. We are developing a training offering of which this webinar is a part. We have outreach and community engagement activities, and all of this revolves around data preservation, reuse, migration, and trust. Next slide, please. So today's webinar is part of the Building Blocks training offer. And our training is very much based on actual user requirements. We pride ourselves on listening to the community. And one of the most important tools that we use to understand the community's needs is our user needs survey. Next slide, please. So, if you're listening today and have not completed this survey, please have a look. And if you can, please fill it in. For us, this survey is not some tick box exercise. It's actually a critical tool for understanding the training that the community actually needs and what we need to do as a building block to accommodate that need. From your perspective, it gives you an opportunity to influence the kind of training that's provided. So overall, this is really important. Next slide, please. So in terms of the training, the core training will be delivered in the form of webinars like this one, video-based training, training modules in Moodle. And the content will include things like the core specification that we're looking at today, key content information type specifications, like those for database and geospatial data, validation and compliance, end-to-end e-archiving systems such as RODA and eARK, and database preservation tools. So there's a lot to look forward to over the coming months. Next slide, please. So the webinars are part of a broader range of outreach activities that include things like workshops and presentations at conferences. We also have a LinkedIn group, which you can see on the screen. We've got a Twitter tag. So again, please sign up to the social media if you haven't done so already. Next slide, please. So finally, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our speaker for the day, who is Karen Bradenberg. Karen is a metadata and specification specialist. She's the metadata strategist at CEF Avira. She's also currently the chair for Premise EC, co-chair of TS-ES, the chair of the DILSIS board, as well as being a member of the METS board. And since 2018, she's been the activity lead for E-ARK specifications in the eArchiving building block. And today, Karen will be introducing us to the common specification for information packages. So, Karen, over to you.
Thank you, Jamie. And I think I managed to get the sound on. And I'm not going to be as polite as Jamie. I'm just going to say next. So, when we are talking about the e-archiving building block and we're talking e-archiving, the standard you always talk about is the Ois Reference Model. And we use the same model. Why invent something new? You don't invent something new, you use what exists. And the big and core things in the Ois Reference Model are the different IPs, so the different information packages. So the SIP for the submission information package, the AIP for the archival information package, as well as the DIP for the dissemination information package. And why do we need these? Next. Well, we do have a lot of data, and we need to transfer this data. And well, I'm not the one who wants to just have data thrown at me without anything about it. So we need to know about the data that are flowing around. And this data can flow around and move around in so many different ways. So if we start on the bottom left, we can have a person sitting at a municipality office working in the records management system, filing a case regarding building permits. We have a staff meeting creating documentation. We have a citizen wherever in Europe creating an issue. When we have all that data in our database, we want to get it out. The database is just not a solid thing. We want to move the data around. When we do an export, we get files in a huge number of formats, and these can be transferred to all the places where you can imagine. We can use this data to set up a new system. We got tired of the old one, we bought a new one, we want to move the data. We want to send the data to another agency, wherever that agency is. We want to publish data as open data, so other people can use our data and create something new. We have a huge group of other members who wants to have the data. The citizen, for example, may want to have the data back. And we also need to archive the data, because having the data today and making sure we know what has happened today, tomorrow, means that we need to archive the data. And when we have all this data flowing around, we need to be able to describe them. Next. So how can we describe them? Well, in a lot of ways. This is an image having a couple of years, made a couple of years ago, or even more than a decade ago. It shows all the different metadata standards that were around then. You can guess there are more today, but these are still the big ones that are being used. And you have them here showing where they are used and for what they are used. And you see some of these cake pieces have a really low number of standards, while others have a lot of standards. And the big thing we have is, how do we know what to use? We need to cooperate here and work together. The next. So if we work together and define a common data transfer protocol, as Jamie said, preserve, migrate, reuse, and trust your data is what we are after. And if we are collaborating and use the same standards and have a profile for how to use the standards, it's much easier in understanding the data today and tomorrow. And I'm practicing your Swedish here. Someone was sitting in September last year creating a lot of stuff. 200 years later, we don't know how the researcher or the user looks like, but they can still understand what we did. There will need some migrations, most likely 200 years or 200 years, but if we have descriptions in ways that are understandable, we can do this. Next. So what we are having as the core in the eArchiving building block is the common description of a package. So we all describe a package in one way and use the same elements. We use the same terms, so we all can understand a package and we all can actually receive a package. You never know what's happened and when you need to send a package to someone else. And they also need to be able to understand it. So if we set up the common rules and the common description of a package, we can all aid in what's going on. Next. So when we started looking at the specifications, the core thing that we need to have and the base we need to have, we want to move data around. And I can swear on the fact that it is never just one file you're sending somewhere. It always will end up with more than one data file. That means that we need to have the package and be able to say, what do we have in this package? Next. So when we start looking at, I need to have a package. Well, I like Christmas presents, no doubt about it. It's always nice to get something in paper with that nice bow on top where you can open. But we need to say how we create this box. I want to have red paper, I want to have a white bow, and so on. So we need to have some core principles for how you define a package, and that we are all talking about the same thing. Next. So we have set up a number of principles, and these has been worked through under a couple of years, and they describe what makes a package a package. It's not as easy as my box when it comes to data files. You need to be able to tell a little more about the package, since I would love to put the ones and zeros in a visible box, but it's not that easy. We also need to identify the package and what we have in the package. So identification, as you see, we have 5 principles regarding information, identification of the information. So it needs to be possible to identify it, and also to use that identifier within your system, and also when you send it to someone else. We need to have a structure of the package. You often have quite a lot of different kind of files. You have the information itself. You have some descriptive metadata or descriptive information. You might have information about who has created the data. Coming from the archival side of the world, we always have a finding aid or an archival description. You want to have that included as well, so you know where this data really belongs in the archival description. And then we also need some other kind of metadata to be able to handle the package, like who's sending it. It's nice to get surprises, but when it comes to making sure we can reuse this and preserve it, we need to know really who's sending it and so on. And here, as Tom showed you, we have a number of other building blocks, and we can all work together within the building blocks. The e-delivery building block makes it possible to make a secure transfer of this package. But what if we don't have access to these principles? Next. Something might happen, so we can't read the document describing the package that we have. Then we actually also have added a folder structure following the principles following the principles. So this comes into an account of making it sure that we can see these are the different kind of data we have and information we have in the package. If we move on to the next slide. Next.
Hi, sorry, Karen. We have a question. I know we said we take questions at the end, but we had one question that related to this slide specifically. So I wondered if you wanted to take it.
Yeah, I can take it, but since I'm actually planning to answer that later on,
okay,
I'm going to postpone it.
Okay.
So we have the elements. We have these principles, and we need to have a description and tell what elements and attributes do we use for describing a package. Next one. For making it readable for a human being as well for a machine, currently we are using XML. It's, if you do it correctly, possible to read and understand. And it has been around for a while, 20 years, and it will be around for a long time more. Next one. So in the CSIP document, we have created a table, or actually we have created a lot of tables where we show these principles, and also and the principles are being split up and used, are divided, so we make it possible to validate these requirements. As you see in the bottom, and it's not really readable in this version, you have an example. So we have the table showing the requirement ID, the element we are asking about, and the cardinality and level. I'm going to hold on to those questions that you have put in, and we will continue on. Next one. I have gotten the feeling that we need to be really good on telling what cardinality and level answers. Cardinality answers how many times an element or attribute can occur. So if it's here you see 1 to 1, it means it's mandatory and it must be there. So it must be there. But you can also have other sets of figures there. Level is if the attribute or element is not mandatory, what are the recommendations to make it understandable? So you have should and may being present. The next one. But also, we do have the package. And yes, there are a number of packing specifications available. The thing with the CSIP is that this is something we have agreed upon together in Europe. And we are looking for comments on how we can make it better. This is just the first version of it. No, it's actually version 2. And it's going to be changed. We hope we don't have to change it too much and too often. But if you see things that needs to be changed, we are up for doing it. We also have the softwares that actually implement the CSIP. We do have the minimum description being already in the specifications, so it's possible to put all the files in there already. The next one. And the CSIP is, as I said, the basis for a package, which means that we actually have the other packages in the Ois Reference Model are adding things to the CSIP. So we add some extra information, for example, telling that when it is an SIP, the type of the package is an SIP, or the archival information type is an SIP, and so on. So you need to use both of them, but not repeating or trying to make it understandable, having 3 specifications in one. It became 4, where all the common things are in the CSIP, and the things that are really giving the different information packages are in their own documents. The next one. But I also said we need to know more than we do about the package, and here is where the content information type specifications comes in. So currently we have 3. One for geospatial data, we have one for electronic records management systems, and we have one for relational databases. And these are just the current ones. These are the ones who will really become more and more, and we are working on a couple of more ones right now, which will be on review during somewhere close to being a good Christmas gift. So you use a package together with a content information type specifications to be sure that you have everything you need for understanding the data. Next one. And here we come back to the question regarding METs that we were sent. We utilize the package with using the metadata encoding and transmission standard METs. And I'm just going to skip over to the next one and give you a brief introduction to METs. I think I understand some of you already know METs, but for you who doesn't know METs, when I go through this, you will more understand some of the principles. So METs is a de facto standard. Next one. It's maintained by the METs editorial board. It's an international board, and we have a schema being hosted at the Library of Congress. The current version is 1.12.1. There were some smaller editorial changes made so we can make sure that comments that are in the schema actually shows up so you can see them when you're using an editor, for example. The next one. What METs does is that and the benefits of it is that it identifies the files. You can have a file list, and you can express the structure, or you might have more structures. And those are important to understand when you get it over to the archive, how to really understand the package and see how things are connected. You can also link descriptive metadata with the digital content. So you can describe have the descriptive metadata in one place and connect it to all the digital content that belongs to that description. Also, when we're talking about moving data around, we will most likely have administrative metadata, like we can have preservation metadata available using premise, for example. And we also need to be able to link the files together with this administrative metadata, because you can have a lot of different kind of data depending on how you look into if you describe for example, preservation on file level or on package level. So you need to be able to do a lot of linking. You can wrap it as binary data. I wouldn't recommend it, but you can still do it. You can do that in METs, and you can wrap as XML data. Next one. So the use of METs falls into the Ois reference model. It can be used as a transfer syntax. It can be used as a functional syntax. It can be used as an archiving syntax. Next one. And the core sections of the standard METs, I'm going to hold on to one or two of the questions that we have, because we currently are talking about METs. So the core section of the standard METs aids us with classification and what the different files are in the package. So the next one. METs has these 7 sections. You have the METs header giving information about the package, who sent it, who are going to receive it, for example. You have the descriptive metadata section, so archival description and so on. Also can be a library description. You have the administrative metadata section, as I said, for example, preservation metadata, but you can also have licensing and so on there. Then we have the part which is important when you transfer files to the archive. It's the file sec. You need to list the files somewhere, so you get the checking of the files. Then you have the only mandatory element in METs is the struct map, which relies on you having, in most cases, a file sec and something more. But you can also have a struct map being totally giving how a book is structured. And I'm not going to go into that one, but it's a fun exercise to do. Then you have the structural link section, can be used for having the struct map getting information on how it works as a web page or how the different web pages are linked together. Then you have this strange section of behavior sec where you can actually remembering old good days when you on the command prompt wrote a line of code and you opened a document in the correct colors and on the correct line. Next one. And the mandatory, as I said, the mandatory section is the struct map. And the struct map is more, you can think of it as being a subset of divisions. So you group things together, how they belong together. And here it is important to have a structure described. How are you using the struct map? And how are we using the struct map in the CSIP? And it's a really simple one, not overcomplicating things. Next one. When you want to be conformant to METs, the thing you need to do is to create a profile. So that's an extra XML document describing how you are using the standard METs. As I said, the only mandatory element is the struct map. Everything else is optional. That means you need to tell which elements you are using. And that is what we are doing in the CSIP document with the tables. We are having the profile is behind that, the METs profile, and showing how the package is looking. You should also register the profile. And as I said, you must use the struct map. Next. So METs in E-ARK is, I think I've already given you a lot there. So the next one. So we have the METs profile, and we have one for the SIP and DIP as well. So we have the tables in the documents is actually extracted from the METs profile. So they collect everything and put it into the document neatly. And so we are totally conformant with METs. We say which elements we use, we say which element we don't use. We also tell how often some elements can be used. So it follows METs, and METs follows the Ois reference model. Next one. For the schema, we are using the schema as it is. We don't make any changes in the schema. Those really familiar with METs know that you can extend METs in some certain points with your extra attributes. And we have created some attributes making it possible to give the content information type specification. And I saw the question here of what do I do if I don't have a content information type? Yeah, you can use and type the information like this and still put it in there because it's still your kind of information. But you can also put in information about, yes, this is records management, but I'm using this specification. So it's possible to use it without having a content information type specification. And when you have mixed, you actually put in the value mixed. And then you have the possibility to in the different places where you have the files, state what kind of content information type it is. So all the things is possible. Next one. As Jamie mentioned, validation. There are currently one validation tool in 2 different languages. I'm not an expert on this to use, and they are currently checking that you are following the CSIP. It's based upon schematron, so you can add all the you have all the rules from the specification, and it makes sure that you have done what we are expecting you to do. There are going to be command line software and so on, but as I said, I'm not this is a presentation on its own further on this series of webinars. Next one. So the CSIP in the eArchiving building block is as simple as the next one. It's used in all the stages, and we use it for describing the different packages or describing the packages that we are moving around. And one of the big advantages is that the tools we have, it's implemented and it's used. And also, I also know of others using the same package specifications for their tools. So they accept packages following these specifications, and then in the middle magic, they use their own, but it's implemented in a lot of places. The next one. So data has been saved for a long time. I'm coming from Sweden. We do have some nice stones scattered around in the countryside where you can see and read what they wrote more than